Amen. So tonight, the title, and I believe I put it on there, Greener Grass. That's one of the titles that you could have. Or I've heard the phrase, the green, green grass of home. Or another title would be Death Row. How does that tie in? How could they even be a parallel? How would that even work? Well, we'll explain that in just a moment. So we have green, green grass of home, and then we have death row, right? Well, you have to think about Paul. To him, it's the same, because he's writing this on death row. But he's talking about the green, green grass of home. He's talking about the contentment and the things that are there. But there's an underlying theme that we want to deal with, dealing with the greener grass. And it's tempting to believe that other people's circumstances are better than our own. It's always, you look at a picture of somebody else, or you look at what somebody else is doing or driving or has, or possessions or things, or their family, or their perfect little family, or their perfect little this, and people only let you see what they want you to see, right? And the devil many times jumps on people's shoulders and puts things on there and say, see, that's the way it should be with you, or this should happen, or that's the way it should be in your circumstances, or lies about what yours are, and so it gets to be a little bit weird. But we want to look at that quote, the grass is greener on the other side, a little bit as we go through this. But we always think things are different on the other side. It includes where you live, the place you work, who you're married to, the body type that you have. I mean, you can get all kinds of different circumstances in there, and you can start checking them off like, yeah, I need this, or I wish I had that, or their hair, or this one, or their lips, or their features, or all kinds of weird things that go through people's minds, or our minds. And so it's about our circumstances and being content. There were two old friends that met each other on the street one day. One looked sad and was almost on the verge of tears. His friend asked, "What happened to you, friend? Why are you so sad?" And the sad fellow said, "Well, let me tell you, 3 weeks ago, my uncle died and left me $40,000. I was like, okay. He said, "That's a lot of money." He said, "But you see," the sad man continued. He said, 2 weeks ago, a cousin I never even knew died and left me $85,000 free and clear. Just like there it was. And you're like, oh, okay. Still not understanding here. He said, "That sounds like you've been pretty blessed." And he says, "You don't understand," the sad fella interrupted. "Last week, my great aunt passed away and I inherited almost $250,000. He's like, okay. "Why art thou so cast down?" And he said, "Well, you don't understand what's going on. This week, I didn't get anything." Right? It doesn't take long in this life before people, not just children, learn the fine art of discontentment. It's never enough, right? What you bought for about a month ago or 2 weeks ago, or the new car, that smell wears off pretty quickly, especially if you have kids. There's something that overrides the new smell in a quick hurry, and you're like, what happened when I got in my car? It smelled so good, and now no longer. Now you have to use the fake leather spray, or you can borrow mom's breakfast spray. Yes. The waffle syrup spray. That's it. But we always want more. Want more than what we have or what they have. And there's got to be more is always the question that comes into play. I need to have more. Other people have more. Why can't I have more? The grass is always greener in the next lawn, even though you may be looking at their septic system. Right? That's the green patch out in where we live at. The green patch in everybody's lawn out there is the part where there's a sprinkler system and then the septic system in the back. That's the green part. So you don't know what you're looking. You might be just looking at the septic overflow and you're like, oh, wow, their grass is really green. But the grass is always greener in the next lawn, and the traffic is always faster in the next lane. All you people that commute here in Denver and anywhere else, we always think, oh, I need to be in that lane, not this lane. And people are always happier in the next state. Now that one I thought about and put down there, and I'm like, I don't know about Wyoming or Kansas, New Mexico. I think we had it pretty good here as far as climate and things that are there. So it just depends on what you're looking for. But life is always better with the next person. And Paul, in writing to this church in Philippi, had planted a church there, and it was difficult. It wasn't an easy thing in getting that church established. And eventually it began to grow. It was prosperous. It grew. It was vibrant. He had a beautiful relationship with this group of people. And in fact, they at one time supported Paul in his ministry. They financially supported him. They gave him things that he needed while he was doing the Lord's work. It wasn't just while he was there, but even beyond while he was there, he supported them. And so we have these 3 points. I actually added a fourth in there, but it kind of is that sub point to point 2, but you'll see that as we go through. The first point that we have dealing with is how do we establish to where that we are content, as Paul speaks about contentment. He said, number one, we have to be connected to God's people. In order to establish this contentment, we have to be connected to God's people. He said there in verse 10, but I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, wherein ye were also careful, but ye lacked opportunity. They were really mindful of Paul and his ministry, trying to take care of him, but through his journeys and going to Jerusalem and his journey to Rome, they weren't able to support him any longer. But it was, again, reestablished, and Paul is making mention of it here, and as he traveled about. And so they did what they could while the opportunity was there, and they were blessed by that, and Paul was blessed by that, and he's just saying that he was thankful for that. And so that support for them came up again. There's an old Chinese proverb that says, if you want happiness for an hour, take a nap. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing. I hear an amen. You can tell on yourself, right? Nobody, right? They weren't paying attention, right? I'll say that again. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing. If you want happiness for a year, go inherit a fortune. But if you want happiness for a lifetime, go help someone. Go help someone, because happiness is established in helping someone. If you're able to help somebody, that means you have the ability to help someone, so therefore you're already blessed. And in that giving of yourself or being able to help somebody, you're realizing that it's beyond your circle of life, but it's the whole circle of life, and that you are fulfilling what God would have for you to do. So their joy and Paul's joy rises as he gets help from them. He's thankful for that, and he's sharing with them how he appreciates it. And so when you make meaningful connections with God's people, two things happen. Number one, it will produce joy, and also it will produce encouragement. Not only for them, but for yourself. First of all, it produces joy. Notice Paul says, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at last your care for me has flourished again. So part of the joy that Paul is getting is in his reconnection made with the fellowship with the church at Philippi, being reconnected. What group? I guess the question that we can put in there, how are you connected? I got some connections, right? I got connections. But we say that, people say that in a way like, I got connections. They got the hookup, right? And sometimes it's not the right hookup. But being really connected is being connected with the family of God. Because there's connections you can have with your own family, things like that. But the question is, when the chips are down, when it's 2 a.m, when things really happen in your life, things start crashing down, families or accidents, who knows? Things come our way, health things come up. Family and friends, the closest friends and family that you will ever have is in the Lord. To where that you can call someone up and say, hey, pray. Call people to pray. Get the prayer line going. I need prayer happening. We need to bombard heaven because things are happening. And that's what we need to realize, is that we have that opportunity. They talk about being connected, and we can get connected with people on our phones and media and all that, but to get that connection with a group of people praying and bombarding heaven, that's a big thing. That's an amazing thing. And so family and friends, but the family of God is great. And so praying through the tough times and through the good times. And the Bible brings this up quite frequently. It seems that in the modern church there are many believers. People are believers. And this connection, being connected with the family of God, to where it's a knit group, not just I'm part of a number, but I'm part of a knit group. And I want to make a statement that says there are many that are believers, but there are not many that are belongers. They don't feel like they belong, and they don't make themselves belong. But when anybody puts themselves in there and says, hold it, no, I'm giving and I'm receiving, I belong here. I belong in the family of God. And it's not about feelings, it's about knowing who we are in Christ and how God establishes us in the family of God. And the devil is the one that tries to pluck and separate and say, no, you don't belong, you're not part, they don't love you, this one doesn't love you, that one doesn't. You're like, that's the part where you get in there, shut up, devil. I know better than that. I know God loves me, and I know you're a liar, so that establishes a couple things in there. But I belong to the family of God. And so we have to believe the right things in our relationship with God. And it's true that it's a true relationship. It's authentic, because believers, those that belong to the family of God, that are giving of themselves, are real. There's a reality in their relationship with God, and so that brings that authenticity of our relationship with each other. Those that are belongers miss that fellowship. When you're not able to be part, when you're not able to, like, man, it was only a week, but it seems like it was a month. It seems like I missed that fellowship, that connection. We stay connected. I'm glad that we do have the online things and to kind of keep people in the loop. That's a blessing at times. But just like many share, it wasn't like being here. And it seems like the one I miss, it's just that one. And they're like, yeah, that's what we like. Yeah, it's that one you miss. Who knows? You never know how God's going to move in a service or in a Bible study or anything, or even before or after. God can do mighty things. I mean, even in fellowship, we stood and prayed with a couple for salvation, not long ago. Just like they were talking about needing, in the translation, it was so we had to get through the translation and all that, but it came right down to it. She wanted to pray for salvation, so we prayed with her for salvation. So produces all of this fellowship or belonging produces encouragement to go on. Paul even needed encouragement. He saw this as encouragement, a validation of his ministry. When they were sharing with him and giving of themselves, supporting him, and he was validated in that regard and saying, hold it, I'm even in prison, but yet they're still supporting me. And I think that's behind the words that he's saying at last, your care has flourished for me again. Though you surely did care, but you lacked an opportunity. And it was just about distance and being able to do that. But, where there's a will, there's a way. I couldn't do it, or, we look for the slightest excuse to do what we know we're supposed to do. But when there's a will, there's a way. When God prompts us to bless or be part or to help, there's a way. And we have different ones going to conference and things like that are happening, and people are stepping up, and I don't know how this is going to work out and how that's going to work out, and different people have given and things like that to help and whatever, to be able to get people there because they believe that's where they need to be. And so it opens up those opportunities, and so it's a blessing. I've heard of story after story of people that have just made it to conference because that's where they believe that God wanted them to be. They got there and they were blessed abundantly, and I'm so glad I made the effort, and it was a blessing. So I'll just leave that at that. Anyway, let's move on. When he speaks about your care has flourished for me again, the word flourish means revived or blossomed or to sprout. It's a word used of a barren tree changing from wintertime to springtime. The air is warmer, the sunshine is more copious, there's more moisture, and that tree begins to change and revive, flourish, blossom, and sprout. And really, as we give and as we grow in God, that's really that springtime coming from the deadness of sin and being dead in their trespasses, but coming alive in God. It's a flourishing effect. As we give of ourselves to the Lord, as we surrender to God, it is that deadness of the winter and that deadness of not having the nutrients. But as we hook up with God and our roots tap down and the springtime comes, it's just like that newness, that renewing in the Lord. So, number 2, to be content. How do we get to be content with God's provision? Verses 11 and 12. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. Contentment isn't related to necessity, because Paul says, not that I speak in regard to need or necessity. In other words, my needs may be met, but my needs may not be met. He's like, it may or may not happen the way I think it's going to happen, but in it, I understand that God knows what needs to happen. If my needs are not met, I just know, I'm still going to be content. And that's irrespective of any needs or what's going on around me. I know that God's got it taken care of. And it's a funny thing that when we talk about our needs, what things that we really think about that are needful. What needs? I need this. And I don't know, it changes as we grow up through life, go through life, what's actually necessary. And I think there's times that there's feast and famine. There's plenty, and then there's when there's not so plenty, and there's times in our life when it's up and there's down. And I think those are necessary for us to understand what we actually need or what we do not need. Where that we can, I don't really need that. When our budget gets tight or the money doesn't make it all the way to the end of the month, and we're like, hold it, okay, so it adjusts what's necessary to where that we realize, hold it, if I wouldn't have, and you start going, the budgets, you start dealing with money and writing things down, you're like, how in the world did I spend all that on that? I didn't need that. And you're like, oh, but here I am. All this month and not a lot of money left. And we all go through that. And it's times like that when we actually see where the checks and balances are, to where we can look back at it and remember those times. To where that there's times in prompting of our faith, there's times when we have to trust God and not ourselves. There's times when we've put our last $10 in the offering just because I'm just going to trust God, because I don't know how this is going to work out, but God's going to work it out. Just as a lady the other day, she was talking about, this battle with paying tithe and things, and she was like, oh, how's this going? I don't have enough of this, and I don't know how this is going to work out, and just fretting. And the next week she came, you know what? I had a check sitting there in the mail for the last 2 weeks, and I didn't even open it up, and then I went and opened it up. I had a check that met the need and a little bit more. I was like, yeah, that's really how it works. God is pretty good at that, as we look to Him and trust Him. And she was just going through that battle, that little bit of a battle there. Really, that trust. Really, am I going to trust God? I'm going to trust what I think. I'm going to dig into the Bible. And it's an attitude of faith. And as we trust God, God proves Himself and meets those needs. And I'm just appreciative that we serve a God that way. He's talking about being content and what's a need and what's not a need. Do I really need, you can start narrowing down your utilities and what's important. Your $120 cable bill, oh, you need that. I don't think I've ever paid a cable bill. I'm trying to remember if I've ever have or whatever. And there's different things that I don't know enough about it. So you got the money, honey, you got the time. Contentment. I've learned in whatsoever state I am to be content. Alternately, that means contained. I've learned to be contained, self-sufficient. It could be translated satisfied with or enough, having boundaries, not being reckless, but having boundaries to where that you stay. It's a sense of discipline. A person can say, I have enough, and that's the word Paul uses. And what he means is that if people help him, great. I'll be connected with those people. It'll be a blessing to me. It'll be a blessing to them. I'll see that as fruit. I'll be joyful because of that connection. But if it doesn't work out, God will provide it. God will give me what I need. I'm still contained. I'm still content. And we brought this out the other night in church, talking about Psalms 23 and how that the Lord is our shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, and I'll eat everything and keep eating, and I'll need more and more. No. He said, the Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want, right? Because I have a shepherd that's preparing and taking care of me. And that he meets his job as the shepherd, and I'm the sheep, is to lead me to the pasture and to feed me and take me to the water and help me to drink. Give me what I have need of. And so he's the shepherd. And we can put some other verses that parallel that. Hebrews 13:5. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. How could he say that? How could he say, be content with what you have? How could Paul? Well, we know how Paul could say that, because not only did he write this down, but he showed it by his ministry, by his life, that whatever situation that he was within, he was content in that. He finishes by saying, I will never leave you or forsake you. That's the biggest part, of saying, hey, I'm with you, I'm there for you. Verse 6 says, so that we may boldly say, this is how he brought that verse out, but this is the punctuation. I should have written this in your on the paper there. But he said, that I may boldly proclaim or say that the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do unto me. So he's saying all this stuff that I can be content and have this stuff so that I can proclaim that God's the one that provided it for me. That all goes back to our worship and saying, hey, I'm going through these things, but God met my need, and I'm not just saying, oh, that was good, God. I'm telling others, I'm proclaiming that I may proclaim that the Lord helped me. Because we're meant to give him the glory, right? I'm just kind of a quiet person, and I don't want to, you want to be mindful of it, and you want to be wise in the sense of that you don't let the devil jump on your shoulder and turn it into pride. But in all things, we want to give God the glory that he's the one that provided it for us. The contentment does not come from what we have. It comes from whom we have. It comes from whom we have. The Lord said, I will never leave you or forsake you. If you provide, great. If not, the Lord will provide. And so contentment is not necessarily related to necessity. And there's something else about contentment. Contentment does not depend on quantity. Notice where Paul is in his description. He says these words over these different things that describe his needs or where he's at. He says abased. So whether I'm abased, that's pretty low. Whether I bound, that's pretty high. Whether I'm full, that's really high. Whether I'm hungry, that's really low, right? We don't want to be hungry. So Paul says sometimes life is like this, up and down, high and low, but it doesn't matter. It's not a matter of having more creature comforts. It's not a matter of having more disposable income, because Paul is saying, I've lived on both sides of that. And both sides of that equation. Paul, of course, raised up in a home where he was in a private school, had the greatest teachers, was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He had all of that on one side. And then as a minister, he didn't have all of those things of luxury. But he had many different times, even in his ministry, and different times God gave him not just where he was just bouncing around everywhere. There was 2 and 3 year stints where he stayed and was blessed, and God blessed his ministry and established these churches. So he says, look at the word full in our verse. That word was used of the feeding and fattening of animals. Paul said, I've lived a fat life before, and I've lived a full life like a fattened animal who ate really well, if you think about it that way. Content. Anybody remember the contented cow? Elsie, you know who Elsie, the contented cow, the red cow that's on the dairy cow, on the cheese or whatever. Yeah, right? The myth of the contented cow is actually not a myth. Milk production is measured in pounds per day, not gallons. How many pounds of milk Bessie produces? It seems that a contented cow may increase milk production from 80 pounds a day to 90 pounds a day. On an industry-wide basis, this is a huge increase in production and worthy of the investment in contented cows. And I'm familiar with that. We didn't have the dairy cows, but I've seen and talked to many different ones that do that. Some where they play music in the barn, where, you know, all the classical music, so the cows are just like, oh, it's soothing. But they really do go to great lengths that they are comfortable, that they have a clean environment. They, you know, you can listen to PETA all you want, how they abuse cows and all this kind of, they're wrong. There's one cool guy it's some Iowa dairy farmer that I've watched on Facebook or followed, and he just gets out there and just goes through everyday living on a farm and shows you, and he names all the different cows. He's got hundreds of them there, and some have names, some have numbers, all this stuff. He just goes through all the things, but the basis that he brings out is how that, hey, if we don't take care of these animals, they won't take care of us. And he gets real about everything, about, yes, it's about production, how everything is there. They have exactly as much food, the right amount of food to where they'll produce the most amount of milk possible, so they are content. They have no problem. They go up and they rub them, and they have rolling little deals where they rub against it, and they're just over there just rubbing away on that, and you know, licking on, you know, they have all the minerals there. They have it all good. They talk about it's a dog's life, but cows have it pretty good. But Paul grew up having plenty, and he had all these things. So he knows what he's talking about, whether to be abased or to abound. And people really put a lot of stock in what they have or do not have. And it's interesting that most people who lose everything get very, very depressed. And if you ever had that happen in your life where you lost a lot at one time, I can understand that. You've made decisions, you're like, that was the dumbest thing I ever did right there. And you lose a lot. And if you think back, I know many of you, you've heard about it, you weren't there. But it was back in 1929, they had the great stock crash that took place where the stock market just nothing. And you couldn't do anything, banks were closed. And if you've read about it, it was called the Great Depression. And the stock market crashed. Some of the executives, some of the big wigs that were up there managing the money, had the bank accounts and all that stuff, some of them just jumped out of their office windows and killed themselves. They lost everything. They lost it all, and that's the illusion that they lose it all, but they still were breathing. They still had life. They may have lost the money or whatever that they were entrusted with, but the deception is that that's what brings contentment. The cash will bring more contentment, but that's the deception. If I have a lot, life will be easy. I'll be happy with this many zeros at the end of my paycheck. And that's an illusion. That's a deception. Last year, or within recent years, Americans spent $73.5 billion on lottery tickets. I'm not going to ask how many are buying lottery tickets. But that's more than we spent on sports tickets, books, video games, movie tickets, and music combined, which is around $70 billion. So people threw it out there on this chance that they would win the lottery, and most of you have read articles and you've seen it put out there that the majority of those that win the lottery wish they would have ripped the ticket up. Oh, but I wouldn't do that. But the whole mindset of it is that they think that all that money is going to bring happiness to them and all of them around them. The one I heard about not too long ago was the guy won $320 million, but within 4 years it was gone, and his daughter and his granddaughter had both died drug-related because of the money. Got held up, $500,000 stolen from him at gunpoint, all these different things that take place, thinking that that's going to bring the happiness, but it doesn't. Even if you feel like you're going to help others, there's very few that know how to put it together. Anyway. He said, let's go to Luke 12 and 15. We talk about abundance and contentment. And he said unto them, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of things which he possesseth. He knew how to say it. He knew how to break it down, right? He said, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of things which he possesses. Then proceeds to teach about the rich man who tore down his barns to contain all of his wealth. He had a great harvest. It wouldn't fit into the barns. And he tore down the barns to build bigger barns and just keep building bigger barns and build bigger barns. And the question came, what about your soul? You're worried about your riches, but what about your soul? And not saying that God can't bless, and God blesses abundantly, and God works through every types and every facet. God has all different people of different wealth structures within the church, and God uses, and people want to be responsible. But more importantly is, what about your soul? That was where the crux of the message was, is this night your soul is required of thee. And what will these things mean? Nothing. And so, in there later in the chapter, after he put that in there, verse 21, he said, so is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. So being rich towards God. And let me bring in the balance of this, is that people, whether you've been saved, and there's people get saved at different statuses in their life. And a portion of the scripture, it speaks about giving up things, people giving up riches or giving up sin or giving up whatever that they've given up in this life. And they said, there's nothing that we've given up in this life that God won't add unto it 30 and 60 and 90 and 100-fold. As we trust God with what he's given unto us, but the first thing is seek ye first the kingdom of God, and then these things shall be added unto you. I know so many that, like, if I get this put together, and they have a good intention. They have really good intentions. They're like, I just need to put this and I need to focus on this more than anything else, but they forget to keep the relationship with God intact. And so then they get down the road a ways, but I've got this established, I got a little nest egg here and all this, and then that relationship, it doesn't ever come back together. Instead of putting God first and let God build that up, instead of saying, because at the end of it, they're saying, I did this. Instead of, no, I'm trusting God, and then God gives me the increase. God blesses as I go along. So anyway, contentment is a learned ability. So that kind of continues to fall into this. It's a learned ability. It's a learned skill because look at what he says, for I have learned, right? Not, verse 11, not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. It's a learning process. There was a monastery in Spain. I've shared this one before, and it was, if you want to join the monastery, so as some of the people want to do that they feel like God, this is God's will, that I go and isolate myself up in the mountains and seek him continually, or be like the Amish and separate myself from everybody but how do you fulfill the commission? If you're up in the monastery, up in the mountains, and if I'm away from everyone and everything, then I'll be pure. That's what I need, to be pure in my soul. Okay, anyway. There was a monastery in Spain, and if you want to join the monastery, you had to initiate as a young monk. You had to take a vow of silence. This is a monastery where you didn't say a word, you just contemplate. Meditate on these things. Now, that'd be very different or difficult for some of us. Some would not be able to do that. Can you imagine not talking for 2 years? I don't know how anybody would do that. Anyway, so the idea that every 2 years you would be able to say 2 words. So at the end of 2 years, you could say 2 words to the leader of the monastery. And so this young guy joined the monastery. He was there for 6 years total. So 2 years went by. He didn't say a word. And after 2 years, he went before the head priest. He got to say his 2 words, and his 2 words were, food terrible. It's like, okay. He couldn't say 2 more words for another 2 years. 2 years more passed by. He goes again to the head priest, and this time the 2 words were bed lumpy. Like, oh my goodness. So he's had a rough 4 years. But he hangs out for 2 more years, and he comes back to the head priest after 2 years, and he says his 2 words, I quit. Right? And the head priest said, I'm not at all surprised, because all you've done since you've arrived is complain, complain, complain. That'd be pretty. All I've ever heard from you is complaints. But in light of that, we've all noticed how easy it is to complain in life. The complaining is like second nature, grumbling, pointing out faults of others or things that are taking place. It just comes second nature. It's easy to do. Students complain about teachers. Athletes complain about coaches. Shoppers complain about parking. Everybody complains about traffic. So contentment is a learned ability. Let's look at some of the things that help us learn. Avoid comparisons. Once you start comparing at what others have done or are doing compared to you, you start comparing yourself. Comparison robs you of contentment and promotes covetousness. You start worrying about everybody else and what they have and what's going on, and this one had this, and this one got a new this, and this one got a new that, and look at Facebook, and oh, what do they get? What is that? What do they get? And you're like, why? You were content before you saw that they got something. You were just fine. 2 Corinthians 10 and 12, for we dare not make ourselves of the number or compare ourselves with some that commend themselves, but they measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves are not wise. You can go back and look at that. There's just a lot of comparisons there, right? 2 Corinthians 10 and 12. So, avoid comparisons. There's one here I have. It says lower expectation. And that there can be a balance in there, but some people expect too much. It's called entitlement. They feel entitled to everything. And when you live an entitled life, always expecting more, you never stop to appreciate what you have. And you can just think of all the shows and different things you've seen and entitled teenagers, or maybe you were one, or you knew those, and the parents gave them everything, and it just never stopped. Like they have everything, and they're not happy. I was listening to something about houses. It says that houses in our society today are 1,000 square foot bigger on average, and the families are many times smaller. Remember back in the day when they'd shove 8 kids in a house, 2 or 3 rooms? They just made it happen, right? Now they've got a room for everybody, and they're all split apart and thousands of square feet, and which ones were happier? Persevere. Let's see here. 1 Timothy 6 and 5. Perverse disputings of men of corrupt minds and destitute of the truth, supposing that gain is godliness, from such turn away. But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. And most of us are not part of the jet set, the high flyers, the swingers, the jet set crew, the bougie. Would that be part of the bougie? See, I'm not part of it, but you all know what I'm talking about. Bougie. Most are not part of the jet set. Most are part of the debt set. The debt set. Owing. And so there's always, and that's the trap of finances and borrowing and credit and all that stuff, because it's a lack of patience, and we've all done that. We've all pulled the trigger on something. You're like, why didn't I just wait? I did not need that at that time. adjust to alterations. People that are happy learn how to make adjustments with their life, with things that come their way. Something changes, something happens, circumstances come along. They're like, well, I'll just roll with it. I'll deal with it as God helps me deal with it. Some are just devastated if something happens. Something falls apart, something breaks, flat tire. I mean, some people, a flat tire would just devastate their whole day, their whole life. To me, that was just part of life growing up. There's a flat tire on that, there's a flat tire on that. Plug it in there, blow it up, air it up, whatever. Let's go on. Ran out of gas, something happened. Car broke down. Okay, fix it. Let's go on. But some, it's like, oh, call 10 people. Life just blew up. Everything's just chaos. Oh, you're like, calm down. It's not that bad. It happens. Develop convictions. What truths do you stand on when you are faced with emptiness or a loss? What truths do you hold to that would keep you from complaining? I must not be able to move from that one. It's not letting me move. Am I going to say that one again? Oh, there we go. What is going on? I'll move to this deal. There we go. Took me all the way back to the beginning. Okay. What truths do you hold that would keep you from complaining? Because I believe it sincerely, that contentment is related to what you believe about God's sovereignty. It really does come down to believing whether God's in control or not. It really does come down to whether you believe that God's in control or not. That God can handle your situation, that God can handle your life, about the sovereignty of God. Job spoke about the sovereignty of God, and he said, naked I came into this world, and naked I'll leave. The Lord gave, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now that's pretty much a statement that says God's in control. He's got it all put together. He's got it in control. He's making it work. And you enter into life empty. I got to keep my hand on it, I guess. You heard the old joke, you've never seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul because you can't take anything with you. And so the last one is being confident in God's power. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. And Paul is writing in this jail cell. He's been beaten up. He's been left for dead. And this man's been talked against by believers and unbelievers, both, right? And he knows not if he's going to live or die. He doesn't know when they're going to walk up and say, oh, Paul, you're getting set free today, or, hey, we're taking you out and you're done. He's been living in that state for quite some time. But that's why he can say, whether I live or die, I'm going to be content. It doesn't matter whether he knows if he's going to be executed or not. And so spiritual success comes in cans. Your fears tell you can't. We always go, and that comes up in our life. Some part in our life, something big comes along. We can always do the thing. I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. But there's things that we're confident in, or we've done before. Oh, I can do that. But when the unknown comes, or the challenge comes that we haven't done that before, you're like, oh, I can't do that. Right? I don't know if I can do that. That's a little different. I haven't faced that, or I haven't dealt with that. And we're all leery towards that. That's when the trust factor comes in and say that I can do it through Christ. And so on the other side, without Christ, we can do nothing. All the can'ts, all the I can't, that's apart from Christ. But in Christ, we can do all things. And so Corrie ten Boom said, you'll never know Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have. That's a pretty common phrase. And Paul had said, it's all Paul had, and Paul said, that's enough. I'm content. I'm good to go. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So there's a saying that says, your doctor may add years to your life, but Jesus can add life to your years. Jesus can add life to your years. You know, we talk about how long we live here. We're going to die whenever we're going to die. But if we realize that God's got it all in control, hey, if I die next week, if I die 40 years from now, whatever that it is, but I want to live it to its fullest. You're like, yeah, party hardy, I'm living life to the fullest. And that doesn't, we know that scene doesn't make you fulfilled. All the drugs, all the alcohol, all the parties, all that stuff, because people just sit around, they're like, you know, sitting in the bars and all that kind of stuff, you're just looking around like, is something supposed to happen here? Is there supposed to be, I don't know what the deal is here. The few times I ever stepped in a bar, it wasn't like, okay, yeah, this is the deal. I was not impressed by it, whether it was a party or a dance or whatever was going on, and people kept doing it over and over again, and they'd be coming back with the same hangovers and the same emptiness and the same striving for the same thing again and again and again, but it never satisfied. You're like, what are you looking for? I know what you're looking for, but you just don't want to admit that that's what'll fulfill it. So anyway, the grass is greener on this side. We've got it. We've got the nourish, we've got the strength, we've got what God's provided for us. So we're thankful for that tonight. Brother Muck, will you pray, please?